The 4 words were, "That wasn't okay, Maya." She said them quietly, in the middle of a session where I had been describing, in my usual way, which was matter of fact, a little detached, the way you describe the weather, something that had happened when I was 9 years old. I had told the story before, to friends, a couple times over the years, and the telling was always the same: flat, informational, almost bored, because it had happened so many times in so many variations that it had long since stopped registering as extraordinary. My therapist, Dr. Okafor, was not dramatic about it. She didn't gasp or look horrified or lean forward with widened eyes. She just let me finish and then said, quietly and with complete certainty, "That wasn't okay, Maya." And something in me went completely still. I want to try to explain what that stillness was, because it wasn't relief, not exactly, not right away. It was more like the feeling of a word you've been searching for landing in the right place at last. A click, an alignment, the sensation of something that had been slightly wrong in its socket finally fitting properly. I had told that story in a flat, bored voice my whole adult life, because somewhere along the way I had decided, or been taught, or absorbed as plain fact, that there was no other way to tell it, that the flat, bored voice was the correct voice, because what had happened was simply life, unremarkable, universal, the ordinary texture of a childhood. She said 4 words, and the flat voice stopped working, and behind it I found, to my considerable surprise, that I was crying. My name is Maya. I am 31 years old now, and I grew up in Portland, Oregon, with my mother, my father, and my younger brother Caleb, in a house that was, from the outside, completely ordinary. Brown craftsmen on a quiet street, a vegetable garden my dad kept one summer before he lost interest, a trampoline in the backyard that was there for years after the springs started going, that none of us used anymore, but that nobody got around to removing. From the outside, it looked like 1,000 other houses on 1,000 other streets. And that is one of the central, defining facts of what I'm about to tell you. My father had a temper. I start there because that is where most people start when they tell a story like this, and because it is technically accurate. But I want to immediately complicate it because temper implies something that comes and goes, a flare-up, a bad day that passes. What my father had was not a temper in that sense. It was a climate. It was the atmospheric pressure of the house, a constant low that everyone in the family had calibrated to and navigated around so automatically, so completely, that none of us had any conscious awareness that we were doing it. You knew, walking in the front door, within approximately 4 seconds, what kind of night it was going to be. There was a quality to the silence if he was home, a weight to it, a texture. There was a particular set to his shoulders when he sat in his chair watching the news. There was a specific sound his fork made against his plate when dinner was not what he had wanted, or when he had had a bad day at work, or some internal weather system that had nothing to do with any of us had shifted in a way that meant all of us were going to pay for it. We never named this system. We never talked about it. Caleb and I simply operated within it. I cannot tell you when I learned, but I learned early, that the safest evening was one in which you were quiet, helpful, undemanding, and invisible. I learned that certain topics were tripwires. I learned that my mother's face had a specific configuration, a tightness around her eyes, a particular quality to her smile that meant she was managing him, and that the correct response from me was to melt into the background and stay there. I was good at this. I became, honestly, exceptional at it. Reading rooms, calibrating my own energy to the emotional temperature of the people around me, knowing when to disappear. I thought of these as ordinary life skills. I was aware, vaguely, that not all of my friends' houses had the same atmosphere, but I attributed this to different family personalities rather than to anything wrong with mine. Some families were louder, some were quieter. My family was tense sometimes. That's just how it was. The incident I told Dr. Okafor about, the one that made her say those 4 words, happened when I was 9. It was a Sunday evening in winter. My father had been in a bad mood since the afternoon, that low-pressure system fully settled in, and my mother was doing the thing she did when she was trying to manage it, which was to be very cheerful and very busy and keep Caleb and I close to her and away from him. We were in the kitchen, helping her with dinner, or pretending to help, really just orbiting her in the way children orbit a safe person. My father came into the kitchen and said something critical about the dinner. I can't remember what exactly. Something about what she was making, delivered in that specific tone that wasn't yelling, but was worse than yelling somehow. More precise, more surgical. My mother responded in her careful, managing way. I don't know what I did. I may have made a sound or moved wrong or simply been in the wrong place at the wrong moment. But he turned to me. What followed lasted maybe 3 minutes. He didn't hit me. I want to be clear about that, because it matters for what I'm going to say next. He didn't hit me. He stood over me and he told me, in a voice that was controlled and quiet and absolute, exactly what was wrong with me. My failures, my inadequacies, the ways in which I was a disappointment, the things I did that made everything worse, the ways in which I was too much and not enough simultaneously. He was specific, and he was calm, and he was thorough. And when he was done, he left the kitchen. My mother put her arm around me and said he was just tired. I helped set the table. We ate dinner. My father's mood had lifted the way it sometimes did after one of those moments, like a storm that had passed, the pressure suddenly gone, the air almost pleasant. He was nearly jovial by the time we had dessert. This happened in various versions throughout my entire childhood. The specific incident changed, the structure did not. And because the structure was the constant, unvarying texture of my life, I had filed it, long before I was old enough to consciously file anything, under the category of normal, just how things were, just how our family was, just what a bad mood looked like, just life. I left for college at 18 with a set of internal habits so deeply wired I wouldn't have been able to name them as habits. I was extraordinarily attuned to other people's moods and needs. I was very good at making myself small in social situations. I apologized constantly, reflexively, for things that weren't my fault or weren't wrong at all. I had a hair-trigger anxiety response to raised voices or sudden silences, or the specific atmospheric pressure of a room with a person in a bad mood in it. I was extremely self-sufficient because I had learned early that needing things was a source of danger. I had no reliable sense of when I was allowed to be upset, because being upset in my house had always been a risk assessment rather than a feeling. I thought all of these things were just my personality. I didn't go to therapy until I was 27, and I went only because a relationship I had been in for 2 years ended in a way that I did not handle well. My boyfriend at the time, a gentle and patient man named Derek, had ended things, kindly, respectfully, and I had fallen apart in a way that was disproportionate and that scared me. Not because I was so in love with Derek particularly, but because the ending triggered something that felt much older than Derek and much larger than the relationship. I lay on my apartment floor for most of a weekend and felt 7 years old. And eventually, I decided I needed to talk to someone. Dr. Okafor was the second therapist I tried. The first one was fine, but felt like a poor fit. Dr. Okafor, from our first session, had a quality that I can only describe as precision. She listened carefully, and she asked questions that went to the exact center of things. And she did not let me stay in the flat, detached storytelling mode that I defaulted to without gently, repeatedly redirecting me to what I was actually feeling underneath the story. I resisted this for several months. I had been telling stories in the flat voice for so long that accessing the feeling underneath felt not just difficult, but somehow inappropriate, like something I wasn't entitled to. I had a parent who was tired. Lots of people had it worse. I hadn't been beaten. We always had food and school supplies and Christmas presents and a brown craftsman on a quiet street. Dr. Okafor was very patient with this argument and very consistent in not accepting it. The session where she said, "That wasn't okay, Maya," was our 18th session. I had described the kitchen incident at 9 years old, and she said those 4 words, and I cried for the rest of the hour. And then I went home, and I didn't sleep, and in the morning I called my brother Caleb for the first time in several months. Caleb was 24 and living in Seattle. We had been close as children in the way that people who share a climate become close, the unspoken communication of 2 people navigating the same weather. As adults, we had drifted in the way that adults from difficult homes sometimes do, because being around each other meant being close to a shared history that was easier not to examine. I told him what had happened in therapy. There was a long silence on the phone, and then he said, "I used to sleep with my door wedged shut." I had not known that. I started to cry again. He didn't, but his voice did something that told me he was close to it. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about things we had never once spoken about in our entire lives, despite having lived through them together. We talked about the specific language our father used and the specific silences our mother maintained, and the ways in which both of those things had shaped us into the particular configurations of adults we had become. Caleb said he had spent his entire 20s struggling with anger, not at others, but turned inward, a constant low-grade fury at himself that he had never understood. He said for the first time saying it out loud, he could hear where it came from. I want to be honest about my parents, because honesty matters here. My father was not a monster. He was a man who had his own formation, his own history, his own wounds that had never been treated, and he reproduced the atmosphere he had grown up in without, I genuinely believe, conscious understanding of what he was doing. When I was 29, I had a single conversation with him, just one, carefully prepared, in which I told him calmly and specifically that some of what had happened in our house when I was a child had hurt me. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he supposed he hadn't always been easy to live with. It was not the acknowledgments I might have wanted, but I saw something in his face that I recognized after years of studying faces. Not quite guilt, but the exhausted relief of someone who had been waiting a long time for permission to admit even obliquely that something had been wrong. I drove home from that visit and sat in my car in the parking garage outside my apartment building for 45 minutes and felt something leave me. Not everything, not most of it, but something. Therapy is long and nonlinear, and there are sessions that feel like nothing and sessions that rearrange the furniture of your entire interior life. I have been in it for 4 years now, and I expect I will continue for a while yet. I have gotten substantially better at identifying my own feelings in real time, rather than filing them away in the flat voice cabinet. I have gotten better at not apologizing for taking up space. I have gotten better at sitting with someone else's bad mood without my entire nervous system reorganizing itself around it. I still flinch sometimes at sudden silences. I still overread rooms. I probably always will. These things got wired early and deep, and they don't fully unwire. They just get understood, which makes them smaller, which makes them more manageable, which is not the same as gone, but is genuinely, meaningfully better. What I want to say, the reason I'm writing this out at all, is this. If you grew up in a house where the chaos was the weather, where the difficulty was so constant it became invisible, where the question was never, is this normal, because normal was simply what was, I want to say to you what Dr. Okafor said to me. Whatever it was, however ordinary it seemed, however much smaller it was than the worst stories, however many times you've told it in a flat voice to a person who nodded and moved on, it wasn't okay. You can put that sentence down somewhere inside yourself and let it do its quiet work.
You don't have to do anything with it right away. You don't have to perform a breakdown or reorganize your entire understanding of your childhood in a single afternoon. You can just let it sit there and know that it is true. It took me 27 years to hear those 4 words, and another 4 years to begin to understand what they meant and what they opened. There's no timeline on this. There's no getting it done quickly or efficiently or in the right number of sessions. There's just the slow, painstaking process of learning to tell the story in your real voice instead of the flat one, and then learning to feel what the real voice was protecting you from feeling, and then learning, this is the long part, the part that takes years, that you are allowed to feel it. You are allowed to feel it. That's the whole thing, really. That's what 4 words opened for me.